Hey everyone, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Friday, everybody. Today we're going to take a look at the new moon in the sign of Scorpio. This new moon is hosted by Mars, who is also opposing Pluto over the weekend, as most of you who watch my channel probably know already. We've been covering that one for a little bit now. This new moon is also in the bound of Venus, and Venus is opposing Jupiter over the weekend as well. So we're going to take a look at this new moon, which is very powerful considering the dignities and the planets that the new moon is hosted by. And hopefully give you a little bit to think about, not only in terms of the transits of the weekend, which are huge, but also the entirety of the lunar cycle to come. So that's our agenda for today. Remember to like and subscribe. We are trying to get to 80,000 subscribers on this channel by the spring equinox. So far, I think we're about 1,000 into our goal, and you guys have helped us to almost double the number of subscribers per month on this channel over the past 3 or 4 months as we made our big push to 70,000 subscribers. So thank you. Helps us grow the channel and community. It's free to subscribe. We really appreciate it when you do. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on our website, which is nightlightastrology.com, which is where you will find all of the programs that our school hosts. So you go over there right now. Promotion for the day is go to the first year course under the courses tab, and you will see the upcoming class, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. This is our first year class in Hellenistic astrology. It starts on November 16th, a great election to begin your study of astrology as Pluto enters Aquarius just days after the course begins. Really nice election there. And at the bottom, you'll find registration options. The need-based tuition option is available for people who might need a little help to make the program happen. If you have a limited or fixed income, we understand that not everybody can afford our regular prices, that some people are in difficult spots financially. And so make sure you take advantage of that if it is something that makes it possible for you to study astrology. We believe and have believed for 14 years of doing this that astrology should be accessible. And that is why pretty soon we'll also be launching our need-based reading service. So we will also be having some sliding scale prices on birth chart readings. And that service is something you all helped us to launch. So we'll be getting to that soon. Stay tuned for more. The other thing I should mention is the live talks under the events tab. You will find a list of our upcoming webinars. My webinar for November on the 21st is Pluto in Aquarius, AI, Aliens, and New World Orders. This is in my webinar series. You'll hear me talk a little bit more about historical and mundane themes around the transits of, say, the outer planets. And this one, I'll be looking at the American Revolution and some of the themes connected to previous eras, Pluto and Aquarius eras, as well as what this transit might mean for us personally. In December, I'm doing one on the 6th house, and in January, I'm looking at Saturn conjoining Neptune and Aries. So some really good webinars coming up. When you register for them, if you cannot attend live, you'll receive the recording later. All right, so at the end of today's talk, if you stick around afterward, there's an informational video about the first year program. You can learn more about it. So after I sign off, you can stick around if you want to do that. All right, on that note, let us shift our attention now to the real-time clock, and let's take a look at what's forming today and over the weekend. So the first thing to note is that we have a new moon, and that new moon is forming here around the 10th degree of Scorpio. So if we go, let's see if I can get this just some minutes forward, get to the exact time. Whoops, I went too fast. So here we go. I'm going to back this up and get this into the range. So it's going to be early this morning that it came through, and it's about the 9th degree of Aquarius. All right, what am I talking about? The 9th degree of Scorpio, my God. All right, so 9th degree of Scorpio puts it into the bound of Venus. You can see the bound on this chart. It's really small. I don't know if you're watching on a screen or not, but you can see the bound of Venus right there. This portion of degrees in the sign of Scorpio in the Egyptian bounds was given to Venus. So we have a new moon whose primary host is Mars, and Mars is forming an opposition with Pluto. Its bound ruler is Venus, and over the weekend, Venus is forming an opposition with Jupiter. So we have the rulers of the new moon, two of the major rulers, the domicile ruler and the bound ruler, forming oppositions right at the time of the new moon. Interesting, and something we're going to take a look at today. The other thing to consider is the sign of Scorpio itself and the meaning of the sign of Scorpio. What kinds of themes does a moon cycle in Scorpio promise us, especially considering that at the time of this new moon, we also have a grand water trine that is very much in the sky, culminating with Mercury in Scorpio, Mars at the anaretic degree of Cancer, Neptune lingering in the late degrees of Pisces. With this new moon, we also see the new moon itself configured within 3 degrees of an applying trine to Saturn in Pisces. So water, 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 all around this new moon. We're going to speak to that as well. These are the little things that when you put together, they add up and create a synthesis that is all of the pieces of which will be part of what we experience throughout the lunation cycle ahead. There's one other detail that comes to my mind here is that within this lunation cycle, we're going to see Pluto change signs into Aquarius. That's a big shift from an outer planet. And obviously, we will see Mars moving into Leo and gradually slowing down to station and turn retrograde in Leo. That's important because Mars is the ruler of the moon, of the new moon. The other thing that is an important detail about this new moon is every year when we get a new moon in Scorpio, we get a new moon with the moon in its fall. This is a difficult place for the moon. However, one thing that's interesting about this cycle is that this cycle features a form of mutual reception between 2 fallen planets. The new moon in Scorpio is fallen, Mars in Cancer is in its fall or depressed. And so the 2 planets are in each other's signs, but depressed in them. So this mutual reception by debility is an interesting one because it suggests that the 2 planets may be able to aid or instruct or guide or help one another despite the difficulties that they each face or represent. That is another really interesting signature. One other signature that I find fascinating is that right after Mars opposes Pluto as the ruler of the new moon, Mars will move into the sign of Leo. As soon as Mars is in Leo, the ruler of the new moon goes from the mutual reception with the moon by debility into mutual reception with the sun without debility. And so now we have a much more powerful Mars and sun combination working as the energetic ruler of the lunar cycle. And this is happening, just as the crescent moon is appearing in the sky. So it's very early in the cycle that this shift of the ruler of the cycle takes place. Mars leaving its fall, picking up dignity, at least in the sense that it is no longer debilitated, and moving into mutual reception with the sun. So all of these little details form like the energetic arc of the story of the lunar cycle. It's a particularly busy lunar cycle in the first week of the cycle, even the first days of the cycle. Between now Friday and Monday, November 4th, some of the most dynamic pieces of the lunar cycle take shape. Venus opposes Jupiter, Mars opposes Pluto, Mars moves into the mutual reception. The grand water trine takes place and disappears. So major shifts in the first 3, 4, 5 days of the cycle. We might stretch that out to a week and say, look, the first week of this lunar cycle is going to be very active and very busy. And what my experience around this, and this is subjective, right? I want to be honest in saying that it's what I'm about to say about this is based on nothing other than my observations and experiences as a professional astrologer over a long period of time. It's not like a textbook explanation. But what I have seen is that when new moons constellate around so many events that govern or are just so closely associated with the signature of the new moon, that often means that the rest of the cycle is spent dealing with the implications of the events that happen in close proximity to the new moon. It's as though the cycle itself is about these first 5 or 6 days, maybe a week. On that level, I think it's important to be aware of the fact that the load energetically of the cycle sort of is in these over this weekend into the early part of next week. Not surprisingly, of course, this coincides with our election here in the US. So even if nothing is coming up for you personally, you will probably notice or observe the tension collectively or in the lives of people around you who might be getting hit a little bit a little bit harder by the transit. Um, I've been saying this lately, but it's worth saying again. Pay close attention to planets that are in the late degrees of cardinal signs in your chart or the early degrees of fixed signs. That'd be tropical and solid in the Hellenistic language. So, because those planets are probably going to be affected. All right, well, let's talk first about the dignities of the new moon. So, as I was saying, this new moon is in the domicile of Mars and in the bound of Venus. And Scorpio is, of course, the depression of the moon. So, in a sense, we have a lunar cycle that, whoops, I always have this. There's this one app that I use that does not shut up. So, and I need to find a way of just like permanently turning off the notifications. Okay. So the new moon is, let's just start by looking at the fact that it's in the domicile of Mars and that this cycle begins with a Mars opposition to Pluto in the anaretic degrees while Mars is in its fall and the moon is also in its fall. So those are some of the most important dignities to pay attention to within the lunation cycle itself. To me, what this says is that there is a heavy emphasis on lunar topics in this cycle. So what are lunar topics? First and foremost, lunar topics for most of us correlate to things like family, home, mothers, nurturing, safety, our emotional body, but also the moon was the planet, one of the planets traditionally associated with the health of the body itself. So it's not just emotional health for ancient astrologers that we see with the moon, it's your physical body. Your physical body is incarnate and material, and the moon was the ruler of the material world, which is always in flux, is always changing. But the moon is, because the moon is always changing, faces, and the moon is always making aspects and always moving, the moon was called fortune. And this world was thought of as the realm of fortune, as in the turning wheel of circumstance, now up, now down, now full, now empty, around and around. And so the moon is fundamentally associated with the body, with the world, with the mother who gives us our bodies and is the mediator of the spirit coming into a body through her womb. The moon is the ruler of the body and the womb and the world and mothers and family and home and origins and history and past and ancestry and things like that. So, excuse me, when we have a moon cycle that begins with the moon in its fall, and then Mars, the host in Scorpio, is hitting an opposition to Pluto from Cancer, the sign of Mars's fall. Notice that again is a moon connection. So the moon and Mars for ancient astrologers were like difficult companions. Doesn't mean that nothing good can come of their combination. It means that it's a more stressful combination for the most part. There's a tension there that we have to watch for. For example, what is one thing that children, generally don't like? Being separated from their mother. What does Mars represent? Severing, cutting, separation, as well as individuation. What is something that all kids have to do, though we don't like it? Separate from our mothers. Cut the umbilical cord. So Mars is that, at its best, is kind of like the power of individuation, of becoming individual and separate and apart, cutting ourselves from the womb, coming into the world as an independent being. That is very Mars-like. Well, this is a difficult tension for Mars because the moon is also about, and the moon, I should say, because the moon is also about how we feel safe and at home in a world that is not entirely safe. So, for example, the Capricorn and Cancer axis we talked about, if you remember, we talked recently about Pan and the world as primal and chaotic and dangerous and yet alive. In that primal danger, there is aliveness. And it's a very important part of living in the animate cosmos that we develop a instinctual awareness of the dark side of life because it lives so closely to all that is holy and sacred. So with Cancer, And with the moon, we're more on the side of things that's trying to create homeostasis, flow, safety within the realm of fortune. We prefer things that are beneficial, enjoyable, safe, secure, flowing, harmonious. The moon and Venus both tend to represent these kinds of experiences: flow, harmony, enjoyment, pleasant things, connection, safety, the womb, home, the privacy and safety of your own bedroom, like that. So in a moon cycle where the moon is in its fall and Mars, its host, is in its fall in the moon sign, see how they're in there, how Mars is in its fall in the moon sign and the moon is in its fall in Mars's sign? That's intentional. That's a part of the logic of dignities in ancient astrology. And so this speaks to a cycle that can be very difficult for lunar things, or that can really amplify the tension between Mars and the moon. So that tension is conflict in families. That tension is difficulty for the body, or the places where we feel vulnerable and we have to deal with things that feel like they are threatening that stability or that safety or that warmth or that coziness. One of the great authors that I've mentioned many times, I've taught him in my classes for years, is Stephen King, born with Mars in Cancer. Think about all of the different signatures of his books that represent Mars in Cancer, who happens to also be the ruler of his house of creativity and his career. Child-killing clown that lives in the sewers. There's something childlike and supposedly fun and innocent about a clown, and yet he capitalizes on that image and the weird fears we have associated with that image, especially, the kind of childlike fascination with clowns who are like adults that act like they're kids. It's a good image for Mars in Cancer. That whatever it is that makes us feel uncomfortable about clowns. Another one that's really good would be Pet Sematary or Cujo, both of which have to do with family pets that can become like killers. The same thing with Misery. You have a kindly old lady who's supposed to be helping someone who gets caught in a blizzard and ends up torturing him. So the capitalizing on the image of a woman who looks like she's a nurturer but is actually a killer. And there's and on it goes. Stand By Me, one of my favorite movies, and adapted from a novella called The Body, has to do with kids for the first time being exposed to death because they find the dead body of a classmate who was hit by a train. And it's a coming of age story that has to do with reconciling with death and the loss of innocence. See, all of these themes are Mars in Cancer speaking through his chart. His whole career is very much expressive of Mars in Cancer. How about Carrie? I think she gets her period. Like sort of destructive superpowers and possession or something like that comes with the period. Mars in Cancer again, right? So you could literally write a book about how every element of his career has been about Mars in Cancer. Anyway, the point that I'm making here is that it works really well to think about Stephen King and his books and the way he capitalizes on themes of childhood, neighborhoods, innocence, things like mothers and families and dogs and girls getting their periods and superpowers and horror. Where there is vulnerability in your family, when someone gets sick and suddenly that feeling that you live in a safe world because your family and the health of your family and everyone sort of living normally is a big part of what creates that feeling of safety. Maybe a lot of people don't even have that. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, it's a privilege if we have that, right? But when that is suddenly disturbed or disrupted because someone gets really sick or God forbid someone dies, it's a very Mars in Cancer like signature. At the same time, the sense of there being dangers or disruptions or a sense of sort of foreboding or ominous qualities around home or family, like even something as simple as there's construction happening in the neighborhood and it's going to dramatically shift the peaceful quality of the neighborhood I live in. Very Mars in Cancer. So this cycle, again, just to kind of summarize, with the moon in its fall in Scorpio to start the cycle and the ruler Mars in its fall in the moon sign of Cancer, creates a mutual reception between the two, while also really announcing and amplifying the difficult tensions between Moon and Mars. Moon and Mars can be reproductive health. It can be the ovaries, the breasts. It can be a woman's reproductive system. It can be things like mastectomies, or it can be things like what's the hysterectomies, like major surgical procedures with respect to women's bodies, the breasts, the reproductive system. Those are some of the most common like health and surgery signatures of Mars in Cancer. Not that obviously that's not meant to scare anybody. That's just like a simple astrological truth with medical astrology. When it comes to feeling vulnerable because a kid gets sick, hopefully not too sick. Most of the time I find that these transits are not like the end of the world, but they make us feel vulnerable. Like there's only so much you can do, and you feel helpless as a parent when a kid gets sick. It can also be about parenting and the relation between parenting and anger, parenting and control, patterns or histories of abuse and violence in domestic environments. It can be about the need for deeper emotional honesty, depth, authenticity, confronting or dealing with difficult emotional topics, especially because we don't want to disturb the peace, but it will be better if we just look at some of these things. That's a very Mars in Cancer-like signature around a fallen new moon in Scorpio. Emotional honesty, depth, making ourselves available to the real needs that we have in our relationships, in our lives, to look at things, to not avoid or neglect things, to let them come up, to deal with them, to face them, just do it. And to allow for catharsis to take place if it needs to. The moon and Mars as companions in this journey of the lunar cycle ahead can also speak to the things we need to advocate for or stand up for emotionally, or in terms of whether it's self-care. Mars in Cancer and the moon in Scorpio may speak to the need to just take care of yourself and nurture yourself, as well as to advocate for people who can't do so for themselves. The theme of advocacy, of defending or sticking up for family members or people who feel like they're part of your clan, your tribe, your family, or who you're tight with emotionally. There are also themes that are very nuclear. All of this would be enough if it were just a fallen moon at the mutual reception with Mars in Cancer. But at the outset of the cycle, we have Mars opposing Pluto. Over the weekend, the potential for some of these events to become nuclear. By that, I mean for there to be something that seems sort of small, and then all of a sudden, boom, it really blows up quickly into something big. That is a real potential with Mars opposing Pluto as the ruler of the cycle at the outset of the cycle. We have a grand water trine forming at the outset of the cycle with Mercury, Neptune, and that Mars. Mercury and Scorpio. That combination also speaks to a very powerful level of emotional dynamism, emotional release, grief, healing, deeper and more penetrating conversations or forms of communication, emotional vulnerability, and big outpourings of, or big releases of, emotional content. This is also, because Mercury is in Scorpio and Mars is in Cancer, about things that are being manipulated, or plans or plots or secrets or things that have existed behind the scenes that are maybe coming forward, that are taking shape. I hate to say that because it sounds like, it sounds so cloak and dagger to say, ooh, there's all this drama behind the scenes that's going to explode. But the truth is that another way of putting that is that unconscious material will simply have a way of being released or showing itself that's quite dynamic. Unconscious material showing itself in everyday life is dynamic, right? I mean, but this is exceptionally dynamic. And for some people, it will be life-changing. It really does depend on where things are landing, as I always say, like in your chart. But if you don't notice it yourself, you will certainly I'm assuming that everyone's going to see events in the collective as well as events in the lives of some of the people around you that are, experiencing it much more acutely than others. But the other thing that can come up with this grand water trine surrounding the new moon is just that overwhelm, the overwhelm of events that lead to just the floodgates opening. Sometimes when one thing happens, it allows tears related to 10 other things to be expressed or released. I don't know why things work that way, but it's kind of beautiful, really, that one event that can be hard to deal with and can release emotions may sort of open the floodgate and allow for a flood of emotions related to many other things that have been held for a long time. Things that we've been carrying can be released emotionally in strong ways around a grand water trine like this. The other thing in general that the moon in Scorpio with Mars and Cancer represents is the ability to find some healing around, traumas, wounds, real sensitive places. Um, the theme of water is very fertile. Things grow, but these waters are troubled. So we're talking about the creative, fertile power of troubled waters. I think that's an image that works. Like, these are deep, mysterious, dark waters. The currents are swift, and there are very powerful emotions in these waters, also reflected by the Mars opposition to Pluto. However, the fertile power of water just can't be overstated. Like, this is very fertile power. And the changes that happen here, maybe not right away, but in the months to come, in the years to come, the events that constellate around this weekend, around the next week, for many of us will have creative ramifications. They'll start a process of creative opening and gestation that will stretch out for a long time. And if you don't believe me, here's the simple thing to do and test it for yourself. Journal about the events, about what's on your mind, about literally what happens, but also about your inner events over the next 4 or 5 days. Put a little star on it and a little bookmark on it so that in a year from now you can come back to it. I would say you will be shocked to find just how substantive the opening of this moon cycle will be because of these big signatures. And because of the fact that within this cycle, Pluto's changing signs, right? It's a very significant moon cycle. Now, I think that the other dignity that's worth mentioning is connected to another aspect that I haven't yet mentioned, which is Venus's opposition to Jupiter. I think this is a fascinating signature around the new moon because Venus is, so this new moon is in the bound of Venus. And the way that I use bound rulers is to say that there is something that a planet in the bound of another planet is bound or obligated to. So this new moon is bound or obligated to Venus in some way. And that means that there's a way in which the moon will be forced to incorporate or include Venusian things. It's as though bound rulers are kind of like a Saturnian sense of limitation or boundary or obligation or duty or responsibility that is there for the planet in the bound of another planet. It's one of the ways that I commonly I found I've gotten a lot of mileage, out of that use or understanding of the bounds. There's other things I could say about why I think bounds are sort of Saturnian, but come study with us. You'll learn more about that. Anyway, so in the bound of Venus, this new moon cycle is sort of paying homage to Venus. And Venus is opposing Jupiter at the outset of the cycle while in Jupiter's sign. So the benefic opposition is an interesting silver lining in the midst of these much more turbulent kind of Moon-Mars themes. One of the things on the downside that Venus opposite Jupiter can provide us with are tensions between morality and beauty, morality and sensuality. They don't have to be opposed to one another. I'm not saying they are inherently, but we certainly do have experiences throughout our entire lives where they are, where the choices between, it's like, do I buy this fancy dress, or do I save the money and, give it to a charity or something? I don't know who runs into that problem or whatever. That feels like a kind of a generic example. I'm sorry, but another question would be like, some people have a really hard time entering into sexual intimacy with other people because they have maybe a background, a religious background, or I don't know, just a karmic background in the family or something that makes it difficult to give and receive pleasure. It's like, it's bad to do that. It's selfish to do that. It's improper or something. Like, it's immoral. And so it's very easy for pleasure and morality to somehow be pitted against one another. And Venus opposite Jupiter can be about tensions that we feel between the side of life that is meant to be appreciated, enjoyed, tasted, experienced with our senses, and like indulged in, like life is meant to be enjoyed. And then on the other hand, what are those moral principles that keep us from devolving into hedonism, And those principles are in a little bit of a tense relation with one another at the outset of the cycle. So that's interesting. That's an interesting, like, it feels like it's in a different world or something compared to the other energies of the cycle. So I've been kind of puzzling over it, like, that's interesting. Wonder what that's all about. The other thing that's nice about Venus Jupiter opposition, they don't always present in that way. Sometimes Venus opposite Jupiter is just about a kind of current of good fortune or of things that are, Jupiter is amplifying and expanding and sort of exaggerating Venusian things like beauty and love and sex and taste and pleasure. And the two can really just kind of augment each other. And there can be a way in which things are both beautiful and intelligent and enjoyable all at once. Like Venus Jupiter oppositions can just be super benefic. They don't, just because it's an opposition doesn't mean that there isn't some way in which they're working together. Venus and Sag might like to, hit the open highway on a like a Harley. Jupiter and Gemini might be, thinking through logic and rational decisions and studying coding or something like that. So they also do have some split between maybe a kind of free-spirited energy or quality of enjoyment, kind of like a freewheeling, like a hippie van traveling cross country. It's kind of like Venus and Sag. But Jupiter and Gemini it might be more like you're drilling down and studying ancient timing techniques in astrology. It's very Jupiter and Gemini. So the two planets may also represent some tensions between the intellectual, the rational, and the sensual that are a part of the transit overall. And there may also be some themes related to, like holding the tension between pleasure and morality as well as sensuality and rationality. Like those tensions could be pronounced during the cycle. Again, it almost feels like that's a different world. It's like and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe for some people this element of the cycle becomes more pronounced. It's a fascinating juxtaposition of themes anyway. One of the things that I could see coming through all of this would also be about questions of what kinds of resources are we being asked to contribute or give in support of people around us? Because Venus Jupiter can also be very generous. It can be about sort of that spirit of charity and generosity that is the hallmark of compassionate acts. Like let's give a huge donation to help the survivors of the hurricane. Venus Jupiter can be like that. So I also wonder if there isn't some connection around mobilization of resources in order to help people, as well as what resources may come to us when we need help. Maybe that's one way of connecting the two sets of themes. This moon cycle, the fact that it opens with Venus opposite Jupiter, to me also suggests themes around the empowerment of women, themes around like Venus opposite Jupiter is a really nice theme for the expansion of the role of a woman. Like when a woman becomes I don't know, I think, for example, in the whatever it was, was it 40s, when the war effort was happening and women were doing the jobs that men traditionally did in the war effort, and then eventually getting paid there was an act that was passed, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was passed in order to ensure that women were getting paid for the wartime work efforts at the same rate that men were. It's like things like that, where there's some kind of justice around women, or there's some amplification of the role or power of women. That's the kind of a neat theme that stands out with Venus, Jupiter in the cycle ahead as well. Although, so one thing that's really interesting is on the one hand, you have this signature of like, there's so much tension and difficulty around the moon, right? And that's like another one of the symbols that we use to understand the role of the feminine. So it's like the moon is in this super compromised, difficult position at the outset of the cycle, and Mars in Cancer reflects that as well. But then there's this weird silver lining where another one of the goddesses is sort of in this moment of great amplification. So it's an interesting juxtaposition, and I will leave you all to imagine, what that might look like in your own lives. Now, in general, the promise of a Scorpio cycle is that we will be going through more. Okay, there's two ways of thinking about this. Scorpio as a fixed autumnal sign from the symbolic orientation of the Northern Hemisphere in the zodiac, right? The fixed energy of the cycle has to do with the things that are most resistant to change, and usually with some pretty deep emotional connotation. The things that we're most resistant to changing because there is fear and anxiety and worry and holding and clutching emotionally to things that we're bonded to that we don't want to be separated from. And this is the body. Fundamentally, nobody wants to be separated from the body, which is why Scorpio is also associated with death, because the separation of that which we are most fundamentally attached to in the body is occurring in the moment of death. So there's this sense of death, but it's really a Marsy signature of separation from things that we're attached to. And one of the functions of the Scorpio moon cycle is to separate us from unhealthy attachments. On the other hand, this is the very fascinating thing about Scorpio, is that Scorpio will also work to defend and protect and fix and preserve attachments that are worth having. It will protect like a guardian against things that come in and try to assault and attack and destroy. So there's this crazy double meaning of Scorpio, where on the one hand, it's a very protective sign, which if it gets paranoid and doesn't allow for change to happen, can lead to real problems. When change does need to happen and attachments need to be severed and so forth, the death is good and transformative and healing, then the protectiveness is problematic. On the other hand, when there is something seeking to invade or destroy or attack, Scorpio is one of the best signs when it comes to the natural instinctual protectiveness that we need to preserve and fortify. This is why when I lived in DC, for example, a huge number of like people that I worked for that I served as clients, worked in the government in security. I was like, oh, they're all Scorpios, cybersecurity, the Defense Department. I mean, like these are normal people, by the way. I'm not talking, people aren't coming to me talk about the government. They're coming to talk about their lives, but they were, oh, I'm a Scorpio in the 12th house and I work in cybersecurity. Well, surprise, surprise, So anyway, the promise of a Scorpio cycle is that we will be protecting some things, and we will be doing that difficult work of opening some things to allow attachments to be relinquished. And discerning the difference between the two is not easy. It's nice that at the beginning of the cycle, Mercury and Scorpio forms that grand water trine, because that really does suggest an ease when it comes to relinquishing attachments. That's not always the case. Mars opposite Pluto could kick that door open. It's nice that we have Venus opposite Jupiter. It's nice that we have a grand water trine, some flowing energies around the Mars-Pluto opposition that suggest that if there are attachments that are being let go of, there's a little bit of ease and flow surrounding the Mars-Pluto that rules the Scorpio cycle. So that's nice. On the other hand, when it comes to protectiveness, advocacy, defending things, protecting things from kind of like invasion or assault psychically or emotionally or whatever, there is also a sense of good energy there to create like a protective barrier. So these are my impressions of the lunar cycle. I would love to hear your stories. If you have a story to share as the cycle goes on or in these first couple of days, use the hashtag grabbed, then tell us the transit or name the new moon or the Mars opposite Pluto or whatever it is, and then tell us your story. And don't share anything in the comment section you don't want us resharing in a future episode. You can also email us your story, grabbed@nightlightastrology.com. I think I'll be waiting a little bit longer before I do another grabbed episode. I'm going to try to gather eclipse season stories and some of the stories from the Mars-Pluto opposition and so forth before I do the next one. But anyway, a chance to share some of your stories. I'd love to hear them as always. After I sign off right now, you can stick around to learn more about the Year 1 program, which is coming up. I hope that you will come study with us in November. It's a great program. You'll learn more about it in the video I've attached next. All right. Take it easy and have a great weekend, everybody. Hey, everyone. I'm glad that you're sticking around to hear more about the Year 1 program that's coming up. The program starts on November 16th of this fall, and I am here today to tell you all that the program includes and why I think you really like it if you're thinking about studying astrology. So a few practical details about the course as well. The class begins November 16th, as I mentioned, but it takes place on Saturdays from 12 to about 2 or 3 p.m. Eastern time. So that's 11 to 2 Central, and typically classes are about 2 hours long. Sometimes they run over with Q&A and discussion, but you can always plan for about 2 hours and you won't miss any of the actual lecture content for the day. You may have to duck out a little early if Q&A or discussion is extending. Sometimes it does, which is why we say between 2 and 3 hours, but typically it's around 2. All of the classes are recorded, so if you can't attend live, you are more than welcome to watch the recordings at your own pace and on your own time. You have lifetime access to the recordings, and everything is housed on a student website. I want to actually give you a just a little preview of what that student website looks like. So I am going to open up my own version of Thinkific, which is the platform that we use. So here's are some of my courses. These are all the Nightlight courses I teach. You can see on the page. But I'm going to tune into, let's go to Nightlight 28, which is the section that began in June of 2024. So here you're going to see that we have orientation instructions, course information, class links, and calendar. Everything that you need to know how to access the course is there, and you'll have a version of this in your own panel that you get set up with when you enroll. And then our lessons are laid out. So lesson 1, we have the video, the audio, the slides, the transcript. We have the Q&A box transcript so you can see what people were saying in the chat box during class. We have flashcards. We have a workbook. We have planet and sign glyph flashcards. We have bonus material, videos that we like from YouTube that we link you to. Say, check this video out, check that video out. They go along with some of the things we talked about in class. So every lesson has material for you to go as far as you want with, but the main thing is the video, audio, slides, transcript, etc. are all listed there so that you can download and watch it on your own time if you can't attend live. Again, the live classes do happen on Saturdays for this cohort, starting November 16th. That is our first day of class. And then going forward, it always meets on Saturdays, and we give you the class schedule to map out. And the breaks that we have, the study sessions that we have, everything's mapped out on the class calendar for you. So those are just a few practical details that, just to kind of start us off with. So I'm going to take you over to the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. And I'm going to share with you some information about the program and sort of walk you through what it includes and what you can expect. So it is an almost year-long program. We typically finish between 10 and 11 months out of the year. It can depend a little bit on some of my teaching and scheduling because sometimes I teach at conferences and it may delay some of our modules by a week or something like that. But it's typically around 10 to 11 months that the program lasts. So we call it our first year program. At Nightlight, we have a program for absolute beginners. You may want to check that out if you are like brand spanking new. That would be 8 to 10 hours of content that's really meant to set you up for the first year course. We sort of assume that if you're coming into the first year program, you already know a little bit about astrology. For example, you have some familiarity with the signs, planets, and houses. Maybe you know what aspects are, but you want to learn more about what they are. But if you are really at the very total entry level space, then try Astrology for Beginners. And when you take that, you could do that right away and then join the first year course in November and you'd be perfectly set up for it. But anyhow, in this program, over the course of about a year, we work through 30 lessons that I lead. And those lessons are all 2 to 3 hours each, including lecture, a little break, and a Q&A portion where we open up for people to come on mic and camera and ask questions and have an interactive discussion about the material for the day. The program is broken into modules that cover a variety of topics in ancient Hellenistic astrology. That is the earliest era of horoscopic astrology. And so, if you don't know a lot about the different schools of astrology, Hellenistic astrology is going to be the kind of astrology that you see a lot of astrologers practicing nowadays. It's become more popular in the last 30 years or so. And that is due to the fact that a lot of ancient texts with some of the original techniques of horoscopic astrologers were recently translated into the English language, and it's created this renaissance in terms of the use of ancient approaches to astrology. I have a background in modern psychological, archetypal, and evolutionary astrology. And so, of course, I bring those things to the table. But the course is primarily focused on the excavation of ancient techniques and the spiritual philosophy that ancient astrologers also espoused. The closest thing that I can tell you to what that looks like is, ask this question: do you resonate with the philosophy that you hear me take on my YouTube channel? If so, then you're going to love this course in terms of its philosophical and spiritual approach, because the spiritual approach to astrology that I teach is really at the heart of the program. And that's a big part of my life. I approach astrology from a spiritual standpoint. It doesn't belong to one religion or one particular school of thought, but you will hear me talking about things like the soul, the belief in the transmigration of the soul. You'll hear me talk about the need to be soul-centered in our client approach to counseling in astrology. You'll hear me have an appreciation for psychological dimensions of astrology, but also ancient astrology is really very, very good at developing your predictive capacity. We talk about what kinds of predictions are appropriate, how to make appropriate predictions, how to be the right kind of astrologer for our clients without inducing any fear. So there's a lot of care that goes into the development of this craft. But ancient astrology is really amazing when it comes to honing your predictive abilities. And then what you'll find is in this program, there's also a pretty significant emphasis on the psychological dimensions and client care. Anyhow, we go into the roots of ancient Hellenistic astrology and its techniques in this program, and the 30 classes are broken into modules. We work through the history and philosophy. We work through planets, houses, signs, aspects, essential and accidental dignities. And then we get into approaches to the delineation of natal charts. And then at the end of the program, almost a third of the program is dedicated to live client readings, where you're going to see me meet with a person and apply what we've been studying for an hour-long reading. We take a break, we come back, and then we workshop. How did I do that? Why did I make these choices? How did I handle this or that came up in the reading? And it becomes easily the favorite part for most students of the entire program, because by that point, you've got so much theory that you're really ready to see it put into action. We alternate those live client practice sessions with hands-on practice, where students get to bring chart questions into class that we work on. And that's also something that most people really love. A lot of people will look at the curriculum and say, well, I already know planets, houses, and signs and aspects and dignities. But not if you haven't studied Hellenistic astrology, because the approach that ancient astrologers had to these topics is vastly different from the approach that modern astrologers take. So you will be, in a sense, relearning basic things in a brand new way. And I think a much more enriching, deep, and philosophically clear way. It's really nice to know the why behind things. This program and Hellenistic astrology in general is very good at helping you understand the why behind everything that we do. Also, it's really important to participate when you study astrology in a living lineage. So one of the reasons I don't let people jump ahead to my second or third year programs is because I want you to be entrained to a lineage, a particular way of doing things that comes from an astrologer who has a very living, busy, active practice and who has had teachers themselves. I think that's important for astrological learning. That's the model that my own learning take, and so that's what I really want students to take away from my programs. Anyhow, so all of that aside, the second year program focuses, after we build our understanding of the basic delineation techniques of birth charts, in year 2, we move into timing techniques, which is all about when the karma of a birth chart is going to be active and expressing itself throughout the course of a lifetime. That's year 2. Year 3 focuses on the development of counseling skills at a much deeper level. And then we also have a 1-year horary program, which is about the development of a very specific predictive technique that can be a really amazing tool to add to your kit. That is 4 years worth of training programs that we have. However, I want to mention that many people take our classes just for the sake, purely for the sake of their own personal growth. Taking these programs is very much like being taught how to utilize a technology that for yourself will be deeply useful for the rest of your life, and maybe for close friends or family members around you. Many people come through our programs taking that benefit away. Will study through all 4 years of our programs with no intention of being professional. This is their hobby. This is a spiritual tool that will have it will pay dividends over a long period of time. However, many people without the intention to practice come into our courses and discover that they're actually good at it and may end up reading for other people part-time. And then there are students who are deeply, intensely motivated to practice for other people. And it is not that our programs really make those people successful. Our programs contribute to your development, but it really is that some people have a calling to practice professionally. And these programs are designed to give you all the tools you need to develop that confidence and to develop a really coherent set of tools and to entrain yourself to a lineage, which you can also develop your own unique style out of. So those are some of the kinds of people that take our programs, you might say. So the 30 classes on the year are then broken into modules. And in between modules, we have 2 course directors who are present in all of the classes, and they lead breakout tutoring sessions where you can come in and review or ask questions about the module that we've just completed, which is usually anywhere between 2 and 3 classes each. So those breakout study sessions led by our tutors are outside of the 30 classes and very useful. A lot of people like to attend those because they also offer opportunity for community and just lively conversation. We also have 12 online webinar classes led by guest teachers that we host throughout the year. Those are free, and if you can't make them live, they're all uploaded into your student folder. You also have an interactive group forum discussion staffed with tutors who typically respond to questions that you have about the material within 24 hours. So if you can't attend a tutoring session or you just have a random question on a Tuesday night, you can pop it in there and you'll get an answer. We also have a ton of bonus material, optional quizzes, flashcards, tons of supplemental material that is there to help people go as deeply as they want. We have a reading list that is expansive. And that reading list, we don't expect anyone to accomplish. It's more so a resource that we give you saying, here, if you want to know all the things I've read, if you want to know all the things that I love, if you want to know all the things I recommend, here's a master list of everything for each lesson. You could go, PhD level if you wanted to and read thousands and thousands of pages. Or you might find that there's just one extra book that looks really interesting and you want to pick it up. But we pride ourselves on making sure you have a ton of resources. You have lifetime access to all the class recordings. You can email our staff or me throughout the year with questions, and my staff will also defer to me in the case that they don't know the answer to a question. So that is what the program includes. It starts November 16th. If you would like to join, at the bottom between now and October 15th, our early bird payments are available. So that saves you some money off the cost of the course. There is a 12-month installment plan that is cheaper than our normal plan, a one-time payment that's significantly cheaper than our normal one-time payment. So you get these little sales that we do until October 15th. We also have need-based tuition assistance. So if you are someone who would like to take this program, but you are on a fixed or tight budget, we have an application there. Click apply now. Just tell us what you need. We give a range. We say between this dollar amount and this dollar amount, what can you spend? And then we set you up with a plan for that tuition number per month. And that is available for anyone. We ask people to apply early because those spots are limited, but we are really accommodating. We try to make sure that nobody's priced out of a spiritual education. Like, this topic should be very accessible for people because I believe that the divine is speaking through the sky, and like anyone should have access to understanding what it's saying, right? So anyway, that is a bit about the program. I hope that this has been useful for you. If there are any questions you have, you can look over the curriculum content on the page, on the year one page. There's more information there. Check out the FAQ section for more questions. Email us info@nightlightastrology.com. And I hope to see some of you in class soon. I think this is going to be a really powerful program because it's also starting right as Pluto is moving into Aquarius. And within the year, we're going to have a Uranus-Pluto trine with Uranus in Gemini. These Aries signatures and the connection between Uranus and Pluto make for a very powerful year to advance our understanding of astrology. So it's a great election year for studying. And I hope to see some of you in class soon.